Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mario Kart Wii Pro Guide series, where I'll teach you everything you need to dominate at the highest level in Mario Kart Wii, including the techniques, shortcuts, strategies, and other bits of information that will obliterate either your friends or top players worldwide. Now, while Mario Kart may seem like a luck-based party game, your average placements are primarily determined by skill. Luck influences individual races, but mastering key techniques can significantly improve your overall result. Now let's dive into what you're going to be learning in this series. The Pro Guide will be split up in 3 videos. First, we're going to cover the most important driving skills. These are techniques that you absolutely need to compete at a high level, whether that's against real players online or even in time trials. This includes optimized drifting, wheelies, and tricking techniques, and smaller stuff. After that, in part 2 is a guide to versus racing online, where we'll talk about the best strategies, how to deal with lag, positioning, and most importantly, luck, which you can actually use to dominate your competitors. And at the end, in part 3, we'll talk about some high level techniques that will completely optimize your gameplay. Now, the focus for these videos will be on inward drifting bikes, because that's what the majority of people who play the game use. But if you want to know more about karting, I'll make a separate video on them if there is enough demand. Now keep in mind, everything I teach you in this guide is important to your skill. I will not mention things that save 1/100th of a second on one track and something that is practically only used in time trials. It's not a guide for every little technique that's in the game, or specific lines that you need. It's just important things and general stuff. Alright, now let's get into the guide. Now before I get into the techniques, it's important to know a thing or two about lines. Now lines, or the racing line, refers to a route you want to take across the track to drive optimally. Now what's usually referred to when talking about lines is letting go of your drift at the right time, having a good wheelie line into the next corner or straightaway so you don't have to use your handling to adjust much, and other small things like that. But these techniques won't help you much if you don't know your way around the track. So I recommend watching the world record times on tracks and going into time trials. And then in time trials, I recommend you race against yourself, not the world record ghost, because chances are you're going to be left way in the dust and you're going to get discouraged. Alright? So drive against yourself and you'll see fast improvement, because you're also going to be able to see where you make these tiny mistakes. So having said that, let's get into the techniques. Let's start with talking about drifting. Drifting is the most important skill to know when it comes to driving in Mario Kart. It's a dead giveaway how good you are at the game simply by looking at the way you drive around the track. Now most newer players think of drifting simply as a way to get around a turn, but your speed around the track and your capability to perform shortcuts are also heavily reliant on some drifting techniques. So let's talk about how you can charge mini turbos faster and how to take turns better. Most people know that when drifting, your mini turbo naturally charges up, while it charges faster when you're drifting sharper. The way it works is that when you're drifting, there's a region of the control stick at the sharp angle side that activates the fast mini turbo charge. But you shouldn't just turn as sharp as possible all the time, because then you'll go off the road, have a bad line, or hit a wall. What you can do is called soft drifting. Instead of pointing directly to the side, point the stick just under the diagonal and you get a softer drift angle, while also getting a fast mini turbocharge. Alternating between the soft angle, which can be either the top or bottom diagonal, and the hard opposite direction to straighten out, is how you charge mini turbos fast. Now having said that, there are cases where holding hard drifts is better, plenty of them, so keep that in mind. Okay, now that you know how to do a soft drift, there's one more way you should know how to get your mini turbos out faster, and that's by delaying your drift. Now like soft drifting, this isn't necessary for every turn, as some turns you have a better line not doing so. But if you're not sure, just delay drift. Here's how to do it. When you press the drift button, your character will do a hop first, then drift. Pressing a direction first will rotate your character, making you turn slightly and making the charge longer. So when pressing the drift, don't immediately hold a direction for a drift, but wait for the character to land on the ground. Then press the drift direction. This will charge your mini turbo faster and will often net you a better line. Now, spin drifting is a hard technique, but we're gonna go through it. So a spin drift is used when you need to get a sharper drift angle, more distance without hop, or avoiding certain objects efficiently. To do a spin drift, you press the drift button, hold left or right, then quickly bring the joystick over to the opposite direction, and then bring it back to the direction you want to turn initially. Now that's a lot of steps, and that might sound complicated, but I'm going to show it to you. For a spin drift to the left, you want to move the joystick left, right, left. And for a spin drift to the right, you want to go right, left, right. For spin drift hops, you simply cut out the last part and release the drift. And here's how to do it with my hands. Some notable cases where a spin drift is used are, for example, the hop method for the double shortcut on DK Summit, or the hop method for the Mushroom Gorge gap jump. The last technique that I'm going to show you in this video is the TF input, and it's very closely related to the spin drift. The TF input works similar to the spin drift, and you use it to get more air or distance from ramps. The most notorious example is the Toad's Factory Lake shortcut, where the acronym comes from, and the hopless method for the Mushroom Gorge gap jump. The way you do a TF input is as follows. When holding a drift, you either hold left or right, then as soon as you get an air pocket, hold the opposite direction. Here is what a TF input would look like, for example, on the lake shortcut. Now if you don't do any of this yet, I would not recommend learning all of this at once. I would start with getting the general idea of soft drifting down first. You can practice this on N64 Bowser Castle, because there's like 98-degree turns with lots of straight lines afterwards, and you can practice your general lines as well. Now after you get that down consistently, I would recommend starting to learn delay drifting, which you can also practice on N64 Bowser's Castle. So you're going to get very fast at this track. Now, you don't have to practice it at that track, it's just the most consistent, at least for me. Now once you have those two techniques down, you can move on to spin drifting. Now this technique doesn't require that much focus, but it's worth knowing how to do it if you want to get good at TF inputting and avoiding traps later on, which you'll definitely need for shortcuts and online play. I would recommend practicing this on the TF stompers. The way you practice it is trying to get back to the conveyor belt without the road next to the side. That's how you can practice it very easily, or you can practice it around BC3 walls. Now that you know how to drift properly, let's talk about wheelies. If you play a bike in this game, which most of the player base does, you'll probably know what a wheelie is, but if you don't, let's get you up to speed. When you press the up button on the D-pad or flick your Wii remote upwards, your character will do a wheelie, which adds a 15% speed boost to your vehicle temporarily. The upcoming stuff that I'm about to tell you is important to know because there'll be a lot of times where you are front running and this niche little technique saves a lot of time. So here's what you need to know. Chains. Your wheelie drops every 3 seconds. You can minimize the speed you lose from dropping this wheelie by inputting another wheelie as soon as the old one drops. This is called chaining. Your speed loss varies depending on how precise your input was, but for Funky Kong Flame Runner it varies between 89 and 96 km/h. This timing will take some practice, but a lot of people opt to play with sound on so they can hear the 6 swishes that appear when wheeling. Every second there are 2 swishes, so you do a new wheelie at the 6th one. Now, having said that, getting a full chain wheelie is a 1 frame input on controller. You only have 1 frame to do it on a controller, or I guess 3 with motion controls, but the idea is you're not likely to get a full chain in online play. However, it is important to know about it, because it saves a lot of time. So just getting a good enough chain is usually plenty for online. Now if you want to know more about chains, there's probably some videos out there. Maybe someone will put it in the comments. I would very much appreciate that if someone actually commented about chains. So if you care enough to type it out, please do in the comment section. Alright, let's move on to tricking. Now there's a lot that goes into tricking, but I'll try to keep it short. We're not going to go over the details here. Tricks in this game can be a huge reason for time loss because airtime in this game is slow. Now, I'm not going to explain why, just remember that as a rule of thumb. So why do we want tricks? We want tricks because the trick boost we get when we land is in most cases faster than not tricking. Let's start with a general term. A low trick, in general, refers to when you get a trick that is much lower than normal, hence the name. The easiest ones to spot are on GBA Bowser's Castle 3. On the yellow ramps, here you can see a comparison of when I am tricking normally versus when I am low tricking. Big difference. Now, let's get into tricking techniques. The easiest way to improve your driving in this game is by applying delay tricks. Delay tricks, as the name implies, means you delay your trick input. Doing this can often reduce airtime and give you more favorable lines, as you can not only use this technique to reduce airtime, but also to realign yourself slightly for an upcoming straightaway or turn. A common example for realigning is on the wall shortcut for N64 Bowser's Castle. Drift tricks are a technique where, as the name implies, you input a drift as you're going in for the trick. A common example of this is the mall exit ramp on Coconut Mall. Flip ramps like these are most common for drift tricks, but sometimes you use them for other applications as well. Now, the reason you do drift tricks is to get lower air and generally realign yourself, just like the delay trick. It's important to know that a proper drift trick looks like this, and not like this. We'll get into other drift trick applications that are more specific later. Then we have hop tricks. Hop tricks can be used for a lot of things, but let's start with low tricks. On slow ramps like GBA Bowser Castles 3, you'll be able to get a low trick on them by pressing the hop button and the trick button as you're hitting the ramp. This applies to basically every slow ramp in the game. Other applications that some tricks have, like the hop tricks, are common for a different reason. Even though airtime is slow generally speaking, there are times where you want to get more airtime than usual, and hop tricks are often good for this. If you input a hop as you go off a ramp, you can often get higher air than normal. Here's a comparison. Now, we have covered the TF input slightly in the spin drifting section, but a TF input means you go from left to right or right to left quickly. Now, we use this input to get more air off of ramps. Now, this technique can only be used on bikes because it rotates your vehicle in a specific way. I don't really have the technical explanation for that, but this is used to increase airtime. Now, wall bounces are a bit more niche. When you trick parallel next to a wall and turn into it or drift into it, you'll bounce off of it and get basically rid of all your airtime. This is commonly used on the GCN Waluigi Stadium or Warrior's Gold Mine, but there are smaller wall bounces in the game as well. That covers most of the important trick types for online. Now, there are specific techniques that will be covered later in the advanced section, but for now you can practice these types of tricks on the examples I showed and mentioned. This is the end of the first episode of the Pro Guide series, and this is just to get your fundamentals up. You'll get better with online just with this already, but we have so much more to cover, like luck, strategy, positioning. All the fun stuff is going to be in the next episode. Episode 2, I can guarantee you, will make you go from this happening to you in most races to this happening to you in most races. So please subscribe and like the video. I don't really ask for that usually, but this video took a lot of work, and it's also a big reason on why I've disappeared for the last month or two. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode of the Pro Guide or on my Twitch, because I've been streaming more on Twitch. Link in the description. Bye bye.